CataractCoach.com, podcast series, episode number 118 with Dr. Alison Early. Being your own boss and determining your own future. Yes, you can do solo practice. Welcome back to our Cataract Coach podcast. Today, I have a very special guest. I've been really enjoying her social media posts. And I said, wow, I really need to get her on the podcast. And that is Dr. Alison Early. Welcome.
Uday, thank you so much for extending the invitation. I'm beyond excited to be here. I haven't told many people this, but I have told many people that I love to listen to the podcast, but I have not told many people that it was a dream of mine and a goal of mine to someday be a guest on the CataractCoach.com podcast. So today is really exciting. It's the achievement of a goal that I've had in my mind for a while now. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well deserved. My pleasure to have you here. Now, I first met you a couple years ago at maybe one of the meetings in Deer Valley, the ACOS meeting in Deer Valley, the American European Congress of Ophthalmic Surgery, ACOS, because we have a lot of international listeners too. And that was in Deer Valley, Utah here, a summer meeting. And I was impressed with two things about you at the meeting. Number one, you were super sharp on the podium, had really great surgical insight. I really liked your input on the podium. And number two, you came there with your husband, and we all did like a group hike, and you each carried a child, and I was huffing and puffing by just carrying myself. And you did the same thing, carrying a child. So I was like, wow.
That's so funny and so true. We went to that meeting. We figured it's a beautiful place. We love the mountains. We used to do a lot of hiking and backpacking before kids, but we haven't done any backcountry stuff since our kids were born. So we took that opportunity, and I think that hike has become kind of infamous because it was a little bit longer and hotter, and I think we lost our way a little bit with the group or something. So it was a little stressful in that way. But yeah, we had at that time, I think, our 3-year-old and 1-year-old at the time. So he had one of them in the hiking backpack, and then I was just carrying the other one in my arms. But, you know, we both work out every day. So I guess that's the time when it comes in handy to be in good shape.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, so I loved your input on the podium. I just thought, like, wow, this is going to be a future lead in our field. No question. Like,
Thank you so much.
If you're selling stock in Alison Early, I'm buying. I mean, there's no question.
I really appreciate that. You know, the ACOS organization has been such a tremendous, really confidence booster and learning experience for me. I think as a resident and trainee, and even earlier in my career as a practicing ophthalmologist, I didn't know what else was out there other than sort of the big meetings that happen once or twice a year. And to be very honest, through a lot of the networking and connections that I've made via social media and having a more public presence online, I was introduced to organizations like ACOS that I truly would not be where I am right now without ACOS and without many of the members of it. So each of those things has been really a big building block along the way for me.
Yeah, now that's a tough meeting for a young surgeon, because as you saw, there's no holds barred.
Right.
And so you can do a podium presentation and someone like in the audience will call you out and say, no, I disagree. And I mean, you got to be pretty tough. But I do also like it's the only meeting I can present at, maybe other than Hawaiian Eye, where I can wear a tank top for those guns.
Another thing nobody will ever forget, for sure. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's such a high level meeting. And I remember before I went to the first ACOS that I attended, I remember Bill Trattler, who's been a wonderful mentor to me, saying, you know, this is high level. This isn't like little onesie twosies talking about something easy or soft. This is really high level stuff. And that's so true. And it's really incredible, I think, as a young surgeon, which I guess technically I'm not a young ophthalmologist anymore, but as somebody earlier in my career, to really hear the individuals who, like you, are just so willing to share your experience and the you know, errors that you've made or the mistakes and how you learn from it and how you develop your techniques. And so hearing people humble themselves like that on the podium is really incredible. And I like those smaller meetings because then you can actually talk to those people at dinner or, you know, in the break room or whatever. So it's really special having things like that.
Yeah, no, fantastic meeting. I think these days the meetings are more about the interaction than it is about going there to learn something specific. Because if I want to learn something, I'm going to watch it on my phone. I'll watch the video. Like that's why, I mean, Cataract Coach videos are 2 million views a month.
Oh my goodness. I have to say, you know, these residents these days, so I finished residency in 2018, which I believe that was the year you started Cataract Coach.
Right.
And so I, you know, like many people before me, went through learning how to do cataract surgery as a trainee without the wealth of resources that are there now. And so, but I started watching Cataract Coach videos then as a early practice physician. And literally every night I would be, after I put my son to bed, I would be watching your videos. You know, in the early stages of, not solo practice, but just when you're on your own, out of training, it's really stressful the night before surgery. And I know that's something you've talked about too, that there's a lot of intense anxiety and stress and anticipation. And as ophthalmologists, especially as cataract surgeons, we have to be so exacting in every little detail that we plan of the surgery. So many of us go through our cases again the night before to review everything before the next day and do some of that visualization and say, okay, this is going to be a case where it may be complex, or this is, you know, a very dense lens or something like that. So I would be doing that and I'd be watching your videos. And it's so funny because my husband does a great impression of you. So next time I see you, or that he sees you, we'll be in Deer Valley this year again. But so when I told him that I had this opportunity today, he was really excited for me because he's seen all along the way how I've really, you kind of raised me as a surgeon, building on what I knew in training to handling so much more complex stuff than I learned at that point in time. I've been able to build on my knowledge from platforms like yours.
Yeah, you know, people sometimes don't realize when you're doing your residency that your first 3 years in practice, you'll learn more than you did in the prior 10 years of schooling and residency training.
Totally.
It's so amazing.
I completely agree. And I thought there were certain things that I thought that a comprehensive ophthalmologist like myself couldn't handle or wouldn't be able to handle. You know, I had never seen a white cataract in residency because we just referred them to somebody else. So I remember just those cases would get to somebody that, you know, a standard cataract surgeon would be able to handle. And I did very intentionally in my first year out of residency, try to schedule cases that I was feeling confident about. I knew going to be at the edge of my capability. I thought it was probably better for the patient to see a more experienced surgeon, including in that white cataract. And I remember talking to one of my senior partners at the time, and I said, "Oh, you actually do white cataracts?" And he was like, "Yeah, of course." So that was something then that I said to myself, I think I can probably do this. And I really learned my technique from watching videos on YouTube and online and adding those things into my repertoire. So it really is a tremendous platform to add to your skills and be able to implement things into your practice.
Yeah, there's a ton of amazing learning, but you know, it's funny. Some of the habits just die hard. So I finished residency in 2000, so 18 years before you, like when you were like in first grade. And this week on Monday, I had a very complicated case. And Sunday night, I'm lying in bed, going to bed. I'm just thinking like, I'm playing the steps in my head. Here's how I'm going to do it. Here's the one I'll do next. If this happens, then I'll try that. If not, I'll do the other. So I kind of plan the whole thing out in my head ahead of time.
Yeah.
And then it's easier to do the surgeries. But so yeah, 20 something years out, I still do that.
100%. And I think those are skills that I feel like I learned as an athlete. I was a lifetime athlete. I was a 3-sport varsity athlete. And I remember doing those visualization techniques in sports and thinking about, if I get the ball, what's my next move going to be? And I was just talking about that with my 7-year-old last night because he had a baseball game. And so we're trying to teach him the strategy of baseball a little bit. And, you know, with every pitch, you have to think, if the ball comes to me, what am I doing with it? And that's very similar to what we have to do as surgeons. If this happens, what am I going to do? And you have to be able to anticipate and think in real time and really make the decisions each step of the way based on what information you have at that moment.
Yeah, for sure. So you did 7 years in practice. You got through thousands of interesting, challenging cases. You're probably in the sweet spot of your surgical skill levels, because your first year in practice, you're okay, but I don't know if I want like that first year associate doing my surgery. Let's say after the 5-year mark and maybe for the next 20 years, you're in the sweet spot. And so you decided then also recently to make a change in your practice. Tell me about that.
I did. Yeah. So like you said, I was in one practice environment for about 6.5, 7 years. And there were many wonderful things about it. I really grew as a clinician and surgeon. And I would say a few years ago, I started really wanting to grow some more. And that was both growth as a surgeon and as a physician, but also growth in a professional capacity. So around that time, I started getting more involved in things like practice leadership, committees, the executive board. I started looking at, I'm on some committees for the Academy of Ophthalmology, and just really wanting to grow my skill set in that way as well. And so over time, I became exposed to a lot of people who are in various stages of their careers. And the ones that, really seemed like they had things figured out and that they were really fulfilled in their career, a lot of them were practice owners or solo practitioners. And so that really struck me, because as a resident, I can tell you, I left training thinking that the days of solo practice were over. It is no longer possible to just, quote, hang a shingle, as they say, and that the only option here is to join some type of large entity. And I think a lot of trainees think that. So I truly came out of residency thinking that that was the only viable option. And I didn't understand that there was such a illustrious group of people who are doing it differently. So I went through a lot of the decision-making process over the last couple of years, thinking about what I wanted my future to look like. And I knew that I had a passion for providing the highest level care to my patients. I love cataract and refractive surgery. That's what my passion in ophthalmology has always been. And I felt that there was really a gap in my market for something really tailored to that type of patient. So in the area that I live in, there are some large multi-specialty practices. There really are not any small boutique style vision correction surgery focused practices. So earlier on in my decision about what I wanted to do with my future, I thought that could be a really cool opportunity, but gosh, I don't know anything about business. I don't know anything about HR and managing people and being a, practice owner. That seems really intimidating. Plus, there are these very well-established groups in town. How could I possibly go up against them and, really make a run for it? But over time, I had to have a big mindset shift and actually turn that into viewing it as an opportunity. And like I said, there is nobody else in my area who's focused on that type of patient. And we, of course, need specialists who do the very, complex eyes and sick eyes and all these things that we absolutely need physicians who provide those services. But I think there's really an opening in the market, at least in my area, for somebody who focuses on people who need cataract surgery or want refractive surgery, or just kind of need kind of the more healthy eye, or as we call it, vision correction surgery. So I went from looking at it as like a David and Goliath situation. There's no way I could ever possibly overcome these large practices, to looking at it more as a synergistic relationship where do something that will really complement the other practices in town offer. So going through that shift really helped me take the next steps to starting to make it a reality.
I think it's important to point out that, there are many different kind of practice styles. So I, like you, am choosing to be cataract and refractive, kind of vision correction is really my outlook on this. And certainly I have a knowledge base and a skill set to handle all spectrum of disease. but maybe that really complicated, unusual case would be better off in a different kind of practice. So there's plenty of room available. I always tell people, there's no such thing as competition. You're only competing with yourself.
I
If you
think
want to
that's so
achieve something,
true.
you can do it. Yes,
I think
of
that's
course.
so true. Yeah. Yeah. So to really take that and turn it into a vision for the type of practice that I want to have, it like I said, took a lot of just working on myself psychologically, overcoming my fear of failure, which I think a lot of high achieving people have. We know what we're good at, and it's easy to stay in that lane and just continue doing what you know you've already succeeded at. But it's a lot scarier to take on something totally new and different and, put yourself out there in a way that you haven't before. So, like I said, there's been a lot of people who have mentored me along the way and really provided that encouragement and just demonstrated that there absolutely is a pathway for whether it's private practice or solo practice or small group practice, but there's certainly a way that all types of practices can exist. And there are lots and lots of patients who need eye care. So like you said, there's room for everybody at the table.
Right. And I think another thing you've done, which is very brave and very difficult, is switching gears, changing jobs. So when we finish our training, sometimes we have this mentality of, well, I'll get this job and that'll be my job forever. But sometimes your first job can be a great one, but it's just not the right long-term fit. It's like your first job's like your first girlfriend or boyfriend. They're great and all, but it may not be the one that you're with forever.
So and that really was what I realized too. So it's kind of like, it's not you, it's not me. It's just, we're different now. It's exactly like dating. Some people end up marrying the first person they ever kissed, and that's wonderful. I'm happy for them, but most of us don't. And very similarly, I think in medicine, there's a statistic that it's about 80 or 90% of physicians do not stay in their first job for the rest of their career. So it's okay. It's not a negative thing to really assess where you are and if that organization aligns with your long-term goals. And when I knew that there was a niche in the market that I might be able to fill that was more in line with my goals, it led me to thinking outside the box a little bit and taking a leap. It was a very calculated one. I know that the demand for things like cataract surgery is growing as the general population ages, and more people really want to reduce their dependence on glasses. Patients want to be very involved in the decision making when they are in their medical care. Surgical decisions are oftentimes just, you only have one chance to make the right decision. So I felt like it was very important to offer patients a really tailored environment where they can be an active part of the process. I'll have a little bit of more hands-on involvement in the entire process because everything is going to be designed by me. I am selecting all of the equipment. I'm designing the layout of the office, and every single step along the way, I have most care that I am in a really safe experience through the surgery.
Right. Now, a lot of young ophthalmologists listen to our podcast, and what advice would you give to someone who's in their first few years of practice, less than 10 years into practice, and just says, this is nice and all, but this is just not what I want to do? How do you build up the courage to change gears? How do you prepare for this? How do you have enough of a savings to start your own practice? What's the advice for this young person who wants to follow in your footsteps, just maybe a couple years behind?
Well, I'll take a note from your book. You can follow me on Instagram. So I'm Dr. Alison Early on Instagram, and I'm sharing a lot about my practice startup journey on there. When you asked that question, I think immediately back to an inflection point that I had a few years ago. I was talking to Christos Ivantidis, who's a good friend and a wonderful ophthalmologist, and I think he's been a guest on the podcast before. And he really pointed out to me that we were all kind of tricked into thinking that it's better to let somebody else handle the business of your practice. Let somebody who's an MBA or somebody handle the business. And there's this sense that you're the doctor, you're so smart, you work so hard, you just focus on taking care of the patient and we'll handle the rest. And I think that is such a trap because we aren't taught anything in medical school about business or finance or accounting or really even not simple, but basic things like how insurance works. We don't really know anything about that. What happens after you see a patient and I don't know, somebody bills for it and some check comes in 3 or 4 months later, and we just have really no hands-on insight into how all of that works. So we get into this situation where, as I've said before, we're trained in medical school to be like the world's best employee. We are so good at saying yes to anything that is asked of us. We are so good at staying late and coming in early. We are so good at working through fatigue and just putting everything else as the highest priority. And so we're like the greatest employee anybody could ever have. And that kind of sets us on to this track of looking for jobs where we are an employee because that's what feels comfortable. So what I would say to young ophthalmologists is to take the initiative, or really, trainees in any specialty, take the initiative to understand things about the business of medicine, whether that looks like something very formalized, such as taking a year to get an MBA or doing a physician CEO type of program or something like that, or just looking into it. We're all capable, intelligent, driven individuals, and there's a wealth of information that you can find if you just ask or if you just look. So learning about things like insurance and billing procedures and coding, or profit and loss statements, or what does EBITDA mean? What is a pro forma? These are all things that we don't learn naturally in medicine, but they're very important if you want to have that autonomy or agency as your career develops. And I think that's actually something that is very closely tied to burnout, which is becoming sort of a trite thing to talk about. I think the term burnout is being overused a little bit, but when you don't feel that you have any agency over your practice or autonomy in what you choose to do or how you manage patients, it really does contribute to something like burnout when you just kind of feel like you're a worker bee and all that's important is that you keep churning out more patients in a day, more surgeries, more this, more that, and it's all just about counting the numbers at the end of the day. So very interestingly, the curves of physician burnout are almost identical to the curves of growth of hospital administrator numbers. So if you line those two curves up, it's like a nearly identical curve, which I think is really poignant. If we don't have any autonomy over ourselves, it does become a burnout inducing environment. So taking that back, taking the reins on that, or as a young person just finishing training, don't let yourself fall into that trap. Take ownership of those things from the beginning. That's really, I think, the best advice I could give somebody.
Yeah, in fact, your Instagram post from this morning that I saw, which is right there, is so amazing because it's basically the propaganda that we've been brainwashed into believing that, you know what, I'm done believing that nonsense. And so let me just get a couple of these. We'll put the link to your Instagram down below for all our viewers and listeners. But it's things like here, the first one is, doctors should focus on clinical practice and let the suits run the business. No thanks, right?
Yep. I truly believe every single thing I put there.
Yeah. The other one says, I'll just read them all, then we can talk about them. Private practice is dead. That's not true. The only viable option to join a large entity. Yeah, nope. Somebody else will always act in my best interests. Yeah, I don't know about that. The only way to earn more money is to see more patients. And finally, the one that drives me nuts, oh no, doctors are the worst business people. Like, come on, people. Come on.
Right. Yes, every single one of those was something that I truly believed until the last couple of years it was like the veil was being lifted, and I started realizing things like I just said about why don't we learn anything about business? We are capable of doing that. And meeting people who have been so successful, both in satisfaction and in their practice, growth and care that they can deliver to patients at the highest level by being the practice owner or by being involved in the practice finances and leadership. And, that old trope about doctors being the worst businessmen, I remember hearing that probably as young as I can remember. My grandfather actually was a general surgeon way back in the day in Philadelphia. And interestingly, he was a solo general surgeon. So I think maybe the desire to be a solo practitioner is just in my genes. But that was kind of what everybody in our family said, like, oh, Poppy, he was a great surgeon, but he never really ran his business that well. And, it just wasn't his forte. So you hear that over and over again, that doctors are the worst business people. But then if you really look into it, there's some physicians who are really outstanding business people. And if you just listen to what they have to say, there's a lot of valuable advice, not only within the clinical space, but in the business space. And so some of the mentors that I've been very fortunate to connect with over the last couple of years don't just offer me mentorship in the clinical or surgical space, but really in the business aspect, negotiation, all these things that are really critical as I am starting my new practice.
Right. Yeah, such great points. I mean, that's, like I said, I'm a big fan of your Instagram because you have such poignant pearls that, like, yeah, decades ago, I went through the same thing. I went through the exact same thing. And now I'll tell you, it's really great being your own boss. Except sometimes being your own boss is sometimes the tough part is sometimes my boss is a little too tough on me.
You're gonna have to talk with the manager, I guess, huh? Yeah, I've gotten lots of advice, and somebody said to me that opening my own practice will be like having a child. It's simultaneously the hardest thing you've ever done, but also the most rewarding thing you've ever done. I think that was Brian Schaefer who said that, and he's been a great mentor to me. He's a couple years into it as a solo doctor, and he's just a wonderful guy. So he's been a great resource. But like you said, through social media is really how I've connected with all these people. And even that is kind of a funny journey to look back on, because I remember when I was a medical student applying to residency, this was in 2013, 2014. And at that time, the conventional wisdom was to lock down your social media, go private, change your name, change your profile picture so that nobody can find you. It was very frowned upon to have public social media at that time.
Right.
And so most of us did that. There were a couple people who shared more like on, blogs or YouTube or something like that, but it was definitely not the norm. And so then around 2017, 2018 was when I started sharing a little bit more deep things on Instagram about what I was actually going through. And that actually started because I was going through my first pregnancy and I was having some health complications. So I started using Instagram kind of as a tool to click on hashtags and find other people who are going through what I was going through. And it was, I had a lot of stress. I was in my first child, I was living separately from my husband. There was just a lot going on in my life. And I found that I started getting real information about what I was going through, people really connect with that a lot more deeply than they do if I just post a picture and say, oh, this is me on vacation, or this is me out to dinner or something. So it was around that time that there were some physicians who were actually starting to really openly use social media to build a platform and talk about medicine and break that fourth wall, as they say, about what doctors are like outside of the office. It's kind of like when you were a kid and you saw your teacher at the grocery store or something, and you're like, what are you doing here? I thought you lived at school. So I think a lot of people feel that there is a disconnect between seeing a doctor in the office and understanding what they're like outside of medicine. And so I started following some of these physicians who were brave enough to share a little bit. But at that time, I was new to my practice. I wasn't really sure what people would think about me posting on Instagram. And I tried to keep church and state separate a little bit and not really talk about my social media while I was at work. I think a lot of that was probably, some imposter syndrome and just not wanting to rock the boat as somebody new in town. But over the years, that platform has really grown. It's been 100% organic. I have never, ever paid to have followers or likes or anything like that. And, there's tons of people who have more followers than me, but I keep everything that I do in-house. I record all my own videos. I edit all my own videos. I post everything by myself. And I think that gives me some relatability, or people just can really get a feel for my personality through what I post. So for a long time, I felt like I had this social media presence and I had this professional life, and I was having a hard time figuring out how can these two things come together, or how can I use one to leverage the other. It just felt like they were kind of two separate balls that I was juggling. And over the last year or so, as I've gone through this big job change and practice development journey, I kind of realized I think this is where those two things are starting to really dovetail and come together, because I can share about how I made the decision and everything that's going into it. And because I've established that platform as really being my voice, it's very natural to just continue sharing that this is what I'm doing on a daily basis. So all of that to say, I'm trying to do my best to share what it takes to go from scratch to a new practice. My target is to have the doors open by early 2026. And so it's been a huge learning experience for me. There's so much groundwork that goes into building a new practice. Everything from figuring out the location. I mean, that's kind of the number one thing, is zeroing in on a property, deciding whether you're planning to lease or buy, going through a very detailed analysis of all your personal finances to apply for loans. And you have to have business insurance, and you have to have real estate insurance. There's so many things that go into just getting a location secured. So all of that are things that, I've never really heard anybody talk about in a public forum before. So I think that sharing that, the complexity of this journey, is something that will hopefully help other people who are on the fence or kind of daydreaming about what would it be like to do that. And one of my goals as I work through this, I've been taking tons of notes and organizing things as well as I can. And I really have a goal of someday being able to turn that into a playbook of sorts, or really somehow be able to share all of that, all of those building blocks with people who want to do it, but have no idea where to start.
I love it. Your social media resonates so much with people because it comes across it's just so genuine. And so you even had a post where you're like, my 7-year-old just asked me, did I get fired from my job? Just like, because a 7-year-old doesn't quite get the concept. You're like, your social media is so good. Yeah, I'll definitely put a link below. Anyone, please, listen to this podcast. You owe it to yourself. You'll laugh a lot, but you'll learn a lot, and you'll really resonate with you. Just follow your especially your Instagram is where I follow. Amazing.
Thank you. That happened very recently. Kids are very honest and blunt. And yeah. I've been basically working from home for the last few months, which is a big change. Obviously, I used to be working outside of the house every day, but and my kids are young. So my oldest is 7, and he knew that I was not working anymore where I used to work, and he knows that I'm like building my own business or starting a business. And it was just funny, those moments with kids where it's oftentimes right before they go to bed and I'm tucking them in and they just kind of say more vulnerable things or something. And he just said, "Mom, did you get sacked or did you quit?" And I said, "My dear, first of all, where did you learn that word?" But I said, "I've never been fired." And it really was just kind of a long time in the making. There was no like big blow up or anything like that. It wasn't very dramatic. I just really felt like there was a direction that I could take that was more in line with what I see for my future. But I do love to share my kids and they're a huge part of my life, although I want to protect their privacy and safety. But as you said, it really is me on there. I'm the one coming up with all the ideas for what I share. And my kids are the most important thing in the world to me. So they just are the light of my life, and I do everything that I do for them. And I hope that by going down this process of building a practice that they see all of the strengths that I have, and I hope that I can build something that will give our family, you know, something to pass down, maybe if one of them decides to go into ophthalmology, or something that's really a legacy. I think is something that I would love.
Yeah, for sure. I think for social media, you also have to decide what is it you're comfortable sharing. And that's going to vary from person to person. From my social media, and mind you, Cataract Coach and all those platforms I use is 2 million views a month. So it's crazy numbers. But you will never find a picture of anyone in my family, my kids, nothing. I just don't want to post that. I'll post pictures of me. I'm a goofball. I'll show you surgery, but I don't want to have any of that online. So I don't.
Yeah, I know. And that's something that I've struggled with over time too, because there are people like you who have so many viewers and people come to you to gain clinical knowledge and surgical knowledge. And there have been times when I've tried posting educational videos or posts, and it's just like not what people want to hear from me. People like hearing about my life and about my family. You know, I'm in a dual physician marriage, so that's something that a lot of people have experience with or are going through. And so I've shared before how my husband and I lived long distance for a lot of the years while we were both in training. And you know, it did actually begin as my personal Instagram account that I opened in medical school, and it just kind of evolved into this public platform. So I totally understand what you're saying, and that's something that I've struggled with too. And I really try to, at this point, not show my kids' faces or really make them a feature, because I think their safety and privacy is really much more important than getting views or engagement or whatever. And you know, the internet is a scary place, and I'm very, very strict about protecting them from accessing the internet. So I think the other side of that coin is kind of protecting the internet from accessing them, if that makes sense.
No, it does for sure. And then everyone can just be themselves. Like I'm not comfortable posting stuff about like my personal life, so I won't. But I love only posting stuff about like crazy surgery videos. So that's like every day I have a new surgery video. But other people,
I don't know
like
how you do it.
It's, as you know, it's a lot of work. Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. That's been really my biggest challenge with sharing on social media, is maintaining consistency, which I would love to hear how you manage to post a video every single day for 7 years or however long it's been. I can't even imagine the amount of dedication that takes. But like I said, it's important to me that my platform is authentically me. And there have been times where I've tried to outsource video editing. Difficult. My social media presence actually to really parlay into a lot of professional opportunities. So it sort of goes both ways. You know, I was in a good position, I guess, right place at the right time. I had some followers a few years ago. And when the pandemic started, there were all of a sudden all of these online webinars and Zoom calls and online talks and all these things that I started getting asked to participate in those. And then that really helped grow the other things that I've done over the years, being involved in organizations like ACOS, getting on the podium, working with industry. All these things start to happen because I put myself out there a little bit. And so I know that it's not for everybody, and I would never, tell every single doctor that they should post about their life on social media. Most people are not comfortable doing that. But if there's some way that you can put yourself out there and just put yourself into a situation where you are going to meet new people, it's really easy to go to meetings and just hang out with your residency buddies and not really expand your circle at all. But I think going to some of the networking events, or really going to some of the smaller meetings where there's just kind of one podium and you're not running around a giant convention center, but you can hear one person talk, and then there's a breakout session or something like that, and just exposing yourself to new people is a really great way to expand your horizons, learn what new is out there, learn what people are doing. I think a lot of us go through training kind of thinking that there's only one way to do everything, because oftentimes institutionally everybody practices very similarly. So for somebody like me, who I chose not to do a fellowship because I knew that cataract surgery is what I love and that's what I wanted to do. So I was, good at it as a trainee. I knew I was a good surgeon, and I decided to just go straight into practice. But even just from changing from the residency environment to the new practice environment, I was exposed to so many people who trained all over the place and just do things a little bit differently. And I think that's really one of the amazing things about people like you and me who share on the internet, is that people around the world can learn from you. I mean, you probably touched people in every country or just about, and then I can learn from surgeons who are in Argentina or the Philippines or India, and I can learn things that are being done all over the world. So the ophthalmology landscape is really so evolving. It's so tech forward. There's new innovations happening all of the time. So if I can even be a little part of encouraging somebody to just stick their neck out, stop somebody in the elevator at a meeting, go up to approach a speaker when they're done with their podium talk, you just never know where these connections will lead you. I always think it's a funny story. I went to Millennial Eye many, many years ago, and I heard this speaker on the podium who sounded like he really knew what he was talking about. And he came from the area that I grew up in Northeast Ohio. And I thought, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. And so a few months later, my dad needed cataract surgery. And I said, well, I heard about this guy, Bill Wiley. I saw him at the, on the podium at a meeting. He seemed pretty smart. So why don't you go and have cataract surgery with him? And so he did. And it was really, now that I know Bill really well and we're friends, I think back on that. I was like, in my first year of practice, I was totally natty, and my dad needs cataract surgery. I'd like to refer him to your practice. And he was so wonderful during the surgery. As soon as he finished, he texted me. He sent me a picture of the phaco machine output at the end. He texted me before my dad had even gotten into the recovery room to meet my mom. All these years later, we have done a lot of work together, and he's been a mentor to me. He welcomed me to come visit his practice when I was wanting to learn LASIK a few years ago. So it's one of those really fun full circle moments that might not have happened if I hadn't started putting myself out there and making those connections.
Oh, Bill's an amazing guy, sweetheart. I've known him and his father for more than 20 years. So great people. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of young listeners on the Cataract Coach podcast right now saying, hey, Cataract Coach, can you ask Dr. Early more questions about starting the practice? Now, I'll give you one pearl that I learned when I first started way back in 2000. Like you, I just did residency. July 1 after residency, like time to start solo practice. My smartest thing I did back then was I had enough room for 3 lanes, but I only built out 1 exam lane, and I got all used equipment. And that was smart.
That is very smart. That is very smart. Those are all the decisions that I am in the process of making right now. So like you, I'm planning the space. I'm planning to outfit fewer rooms than I have the capacity to expand to. And I think advice that I would also give to somebody who might find themselves in this position is to save your money. Save your money. You know, I mentioned my husband and I are both physicians. We both drive cars that are not fancy. There was a time when we both would go to work and had the oldest car in the parking lot, including all of the staff. We both had the oldest car. So we didn't spend our money frivolously, which has really now at this point given me the opportunity to dedicate time of mine to making all these decisions that I need to make. And I'm learning a lot in the process. And I think because I've afforded myself the ability to kind of focus on this project right now, for example, negotiation. I'm not having to sign contracts with vendors under pressure. I can take the time to understand it. I can get a couple different quotes on things, work them, you know, okay, if I get a quote from option A, I can tell them what option B gave me the number for. And I might end up signing with the same company that I thought I was going to in the beginning, but because I've taken the time to really work the negotiation, I'm saving a lot of money that way. So it's a lot of new learning, but I think, like you said, kind of starting small, but with the opportunity or the space to grow. And most people that I've talked to who have gone solo are very quickly exceeding what they started out with in terms of expectations and space and everything. So I think that's a great problem to have.
What kind of space are you looking for now? How many square feet about?
So interestingly, so I'm looking at about a 4,000 square foot space, which I know sounds
that's
really
big.
big for just an office. Well, for one thing, real estate in Southwest Ohio is much different than real estate in Beverly Hills. But part of the reason that I wanted a space that size is because as part of my practice, I'll be doing office-based surgery, which is a little bit newer frontier in ophthalmology. But as I said before, my goal is to really offer patients almost a concierge level experience where everything is really high end, very integrated, boutique style practice. And so my vision is that the entire process will happen within the walls of my practice. So office-based surgery is something that, so it's a little bit newer, you know, kind of on the leading edge of the bubble, but traditionally things like cataract surgery have been done in the ambulatory surgery center or ASC environment or in hospitals. And I wasn't around for this, but at some point some years ago, there was a big shakeup when cataract surgery went from being done in the hospital to being done in the ASC. And a lot of people were very uncomfortable with that. And kind of the second wave of that is starting to happen where physicians are going from the ASC environment with IV sedation and monitored anesthesia care to the office-based environment, which is oftentimes going to be oral sedation and just kind of a more comforting environment. So what we find with office-based surgery is that because it's a familiar environment to the patient, they've already been there in the office at the time when they come in for their consult. They've probably seen the surgical suite during their consultation visit. They don't have to go somewhere else on surgery day. They've already been there. They don't have to go to, you know, get their blood drawn somewhere else and then come back with their results or get their physical somewhere else, et cetera. Now, of course, there's certain patients who will not be the perfect demographic, whether it's for health comorbidities or any number of reasons. But for patients who are generally healthy, they do extremely well with oral sedation for what for most experienced cataract surgeons is going to be under a 10-minute procedure. And we have lots and lots of patients who have had eye surgery under oral sedation with LASIK and refractive surgery. So we know that we can get adequate analgesia with topical numbing drops and things like that. And to just get patients a little bit relaxed before they even come into the room, before they come into the room, gives them just a nice, comfortable environment. They can ambulate out of the surgery and, kind of go about the rest of their day. So that's also something that I'll be offering that is new in the market that I'm in. There aren't any cataract surgeons offering office-based surgery. So I think that's something that patients will really appreciate, cool. The convenience of.
You're cutting edge. You're beyond me. So in my clinic, I'm not offering in office. We go to a surgery center just down the road. So that's super cutting edge. If you are interested, if you're a young ophthalmologist, we had a podcast with Parag Majmudar, Majmudar. The entire hour we talked only about this topic, about setting up an in-office surgery suite. So I think it's fantastic that you're doing that. Now, how many exam lanes are you going to be planning for? And are you going to have an excimer laser on site too?
Right now, I'm going to be doing an open access situation for a laser. And I think just the CapEx of investing in a laser right now was not something I felt like I was capable of doing, but I'm fortunate to have another option for that. So my in-office surgery suite will be focused on cataract, refractive lens exchange, and ICL surgery. And as you mentioned, Parag Majmudar, one of the kind of leaders in the OBS or office-based surgery industry. Practices like his who have been very successful in the ASC setting are still finding that there's really a role for office-based surgery cases. So the more you learn about it, the more you talk about it. And I think it's important to mention that these surgical suites are built to the highest standards. So this is not like going to be done in a broom closet or something. These are actual surgical suites where all of the regulatory and accreditation processes are met and exceeded, and these are accredited surgical suites. So I think when surgeons understand that and when patients understand that, there's very little downside to having that type of integration. And it's something that has been done for many, many years in other specialties like oral surgery and even plastic surgery. There's lots of other specialists that have surgical capability within their office. And it is, like I said, very interesting that oftentimes patients feel more relaxed. They don't have that immediate surge of anxiety when they check into like kind of a hospital-y feeling sterile environment. They're coming somewhere that they've already been and they're familiar with, and that just keeps their baseline anxiety level down. But I think most of us agree, even those of us who are kind of in the OBS space, that there will still be absolutely patients who necessitate either an ASC or even a hospital setting, whether it's somebody that needs general anesthesia for some reason. So I think most people who are in the OBS space will still have a capability to do cases in a different environment as the need arises.
Right. So how many exam lanes are you planning on building initially? And then what's probably total capacity? What will you move up to?
Well, maybe you're going to tell me that I'm thinking wrong, but my floor plan has room for 4 to 5 exam lanes, and I'm planning to outfit 3 in the beginning, but maybe you think that's too many. I don't know.
Well, no, honestly, it just depends on budgeting and other constraints here too. So when I first started off, I was, fresh, literally, it's July 1, the day after I finished residency, I'm starting here. And so I built out, I had a capacity for 3 rooms in this rented space. And I only had the money to build out, get, a lane equipment for 1 room. Because people, a slit lamp and a 4-opter is expensive.
It's incredibly expensive.
Right. So
totally. So that's the process that I'm working through right now, is getting pricing on all the exam lane equipment. And generally I would say it's just to outfit an exam lane. And this is not like any of the tech that goes into the diagnostics or any of that other stuff, but just the equipment for an exam lane is generally looking like somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000. So So it's pretty pricey. Ophthalmology, unfortunately, is not a specialty that could easily slide into leasing a day or two a week from a primary care office or, a dermatologist or something like that, because we have really high overhead in equipment. There's tons of high tech stuff that we need, both in the exam lanes as well as in the diagnostic area. You have biometers and topographers and visual fields and all these things that are taking up some space real estate, but you have to have those in order to deliver the level of ophthalmic care that you and I want to give. And then because I'm planning to outfit a surgical suite too, that adds a whole nother big ticket list of items that I have to purchase. So it's definitely a big financial risk.
Right, down the road when you get a femtosecond laser and an excimer laser, that's even more.
That's even more. Yeah, so the calculation we made was basically, we can invest a lot of money here up front into building something that I have ownership over and will be an asset to myself and my family, versus if I had maybe joined another practice and bought in as a partner. A lot of times those buy-ins are into the millions of dollars. So whether it was spending some money right now to invest in building something for myself, or deferring that for a few years in anticipation of buying into a practice that's already established, there's a financial investment or financial risk either way. And it just felt like the right decision for us was to take the leap and do it myself.
Yeah, and for a young ophthalmologist, seriously consider a lot of the used equipment, and then ask yourself if you really, really, really need something. So if, let's say, for a biometer to measure axial length or do your lens calcs, there are devices now, the real fancy ones, like $70,000. But you can get like a couple-year-old Hogstrite lens star for like 10, 12,000. That's probably your best. And then what else are you gonna need? You're gonna need I'd say get a. For me, my bias is a NIDEC OPD scan. I don't have any associated with that company, but that's a topographer plus autorefractor plus high order aberrations, pupil size. That's all one. Then I do some sort of for excimer surgery, for corneal surgery. You need some sort of tomographer. So I either looked at Pentacam or Galilei. We talked about the lens stars, which is what I choose. Then I choose some sort of lightly used, maybe a half generation old OCT machine. So you get OCT macula, OCT optic nerve. And I think with that as a start, you're pretty good. I don't know if you need much more.
I like the way you're thinking. I think all of those, like you said, there's certain things that you can buy lightly used, refurbished, and the technology is still up to date. So anywhere that I can buy something that's refurbished and still in good condition, I think that's definitely the way to go. And because things update so quickly and there's so much new technology coming out, we all know that within the next 3 or 5 or however many years, there's going to be a new fancier model of anything that we buy today. So yeah, exactly to your point, the refurbished market, there's a lot of really good stuff out there.
Yeah, they just kind of keep spending in check initially because, as you said, the first year or two, the margins can be really thin.
Any other advice you have? I'd love to hear, if you were going to start today, anything you would have done differently?
I would. I mean, listen, I'm my own worst critic, my own toughest critic. So I always think I did everything wrong. So, but I think the tough part, the hardest challenge you're going to have is getting patients in the door. And if you start a practice based on only, let's say, advertising, let's say, this is not so common anymore. Back in the day, people were doing radio advertising all the time. And I met an ophthalmologist. I'm a young guy, a year out of practice, 2 years out of practice. I met some ophthalmologist who's doing a lot of LASIK and had radio ads all the time. And he said, well, you got to be prepared. You know, my radio ad budget is $200,000. I said, wow, $200,000 a year. That's like 18. No, he says, it's $200,000 a month. And I was like, this is 20 years ago. I was like, I can't believe it. But he says, it gets him a ton of patients. But he says, the mistake he made is the day he stops advertising his practice dries up. Because the fallacy, he says, is that you advertise, get the patients in the door, and then those patients will give you the word of mouth. No. He says people who respond to radio ads tend to be people who respond to radio ads, and they don't do word of mouth, and they don't tell their friends. And they don't. So it's like, oh, wow. So to me, today, my biggest source of referrals is just absolute word of mouth. And then it's kind of organic. I'm very fortunate that if you Google any complex eye condition plus cataract, well, I got a lot of material out there on the internet. But that's the main question you should ask you. My best advice is, how will you get the patients in the door? And then in the LA, co-management with optometrists is very tough because it really is like a bidding war, and I'm just not willing to play.
Yeah, that's a really complicated issue. I think depends a lot on the market, but I think, like you said, that the word of mouth is really important, and I've always really believed in, and I am good at building relationships. So it's actually been amazing. And again, another good reason that I've been on social media is that my patients have been able to find me. So just about every week, I'm getting messages from patients who are like, when can I come see you again? And I can't wait till you open your practice. And they found me on LinkedIn and Instagram. And I don't know, sometimes I get emails from them. I have no idea how they found my email address, but I've always really believed in building those relationships. And I had a lot of strong relationships with referral doctors and optometrists, and being accessible in the ways that I am, I think has given me a little bit of leverage or a little bit of a leg up there. And definitely refractive patients are a different ballgame than, cataract or kind of insurance situation patients. Refractive patients are oftentimes self-referred. And so those do take a lot more pounding the pavement, a lot more legwork to get those refractive surgery patients in. But being somebody like you've learned and like I'm trying to become, is somebody who is visible and trustworthy and informed, and keeping up with the technology and able to offer patients what they are searching for is I think a really powerful thing that will hopefully continue getting patients coming through the door.
No, you're going to succeed 100%, because ultimately it's hard work and a little luck. And then the harder you work, the luckier you get. So you have that. You certainly have the clinical acumen, the surgical skills. I mean, you're on the podium, you're fantastic. You obviously you have deep expertise in what you're going to be doing, and you've got that drive and determination. And plus, your social media is fun. So I think
Thank you so much.
No question. In fact, I'd say the overall numbers are, I'd say at least 90% of people who start prior practice in ophthalmology from solo, as from scratch, at least 90% succeed. It's really, really rare to see one that doesn't.
I think that sounds accurate to me. I even heard a statistic that for ophthalmology practices, even with absolutely no marketing, $0 spent, the average growth rate is 10% per year.
Right.
What we
no question about it.
Literally experience what you've done for them with their vision correction surgery or cataract surgery every single waking moment of the rest of their life. So that's really powerful. There's almost nothing else that patients have that level of intimacy with. And so when you give them their vision back, or when you deliver them something that they've not had for their entire life, if they were a high myope or something like that, and they've never been able to see the leaves on the trees, that really sticks with people. And it can be life-changing. I'm sure you've had many experiences like that, but I always remember a patient experience that I had where, for me as the surgeon, it was just kind of a regular everyday cataract surgery. The patient came back the next day and he was being seen in the office by one of our optometrists, and the optometrist came over and got me and said, Mr. So-and-so really wants to talk to you. And I went in, and this man who, is a very typical, like, Ohio looking guy, just very, masculine, big guy. And he was crying, and he said, you changed my life day one after surgery. So those types of things are just really incredible and really unique about what we do is that we can change somebody's life with a surgery that, maybe takes 7 or 10 minutes. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to thank you for spending the last hour with me. You are really an inspiration to a lot of young people. We'll put all your links down below. Definitely, if you're a young ophthalmologist and you have an inclination, at a minimum, learn more about this. Follow Alison's Instagram. See what she's doing there. Decide if this is something you could do. And if you decide to do it, I think you're going to succeed.
Okay. Thank you, Uday, so much again for being so willing to share my story and have me on this podcast. Like I said, it's been a dream of mine. It's an honor to be here today. You have made a tremendous impact in my career as a surgeon, which I'm sure you hear all the time, but I hope you know how many people you've really helped develop into the ophthalmologists and surgeons they are today. And so I just really want to thank you. And I hope that some of the people who are listening here start to ask themselves some questions about why they're doing what they're doing and really making sure that it aligns with what they want for their career. And I hope that I've helped just at least one person today.
Oh, I bet you've helped countless. You'll be surprised. But I think the reemergence of private practice and boutique practices is coming back.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you again. And I'll remind our listeners and viewers, remember, we got a new Cataract Coach podcast every single week. We got a new Retina Rounds podcast every week. New Cataract Coach video every single day, 2,600 videos and counting. And we got a new Retina Rounds video every single day. Already passed 100 videos there too. So until next time, I'll catch you later.